Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives, jobs, debts, all of that. I'm your host, Richard Ulfs, and it's my pleasure to bring to you each week the updates and the analyses that may make the economic system more understandable and subject to the change it so badly needs. Today's program is going to be devoted, in a sense, to a single topic, fascism. It is back on the radar all around the world in a way that we haven't seen since pretty much the 1930s, almost a century ago. And in that lies a lesson that we're going to develop in this program. But first, let's talk about how it's back in the news and why. Well, first, and perhaps most important, is to recognize that the fascist response to society's problems has very often featured what is called a strong man. The way this game is played out politically is that the society, as it begins to crumble, and we're talking about capitalist societies, whether in the 1920s and 30s in Germany or Italy or Japan or any of the other countries which had this kind of problem, when capitalism begins to unravel, to fall apart, one of the responses, understandably, is for someone to step up and say, well, the society's falling apart, the traditional political parties are not being able to function or they're not saving the situation, so here I am, the strong man who will lead us out of all of this trouble. So let's go through the current crop of strong men. You all remember the old crop, the Mussolini, the Hitler, etc. Well, today we have, in Hungary, Viktor Orban. In the United States, Donald Trump. In Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro. I could go on, but you get the picture. They're popping up all over the place. In France, you don't yet see them in power, but you see them running political parties. Marine Le Pen in the National Front organization. In Germany, there's a political party that has zoomed into prominence called the Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland. And again, you can see in Spanish politics, you can see in the government of Italy, and so on, the emergence of strong popular leaders like Mr. Trump, who's going to sort it all out. First, throw away the old Republicans, then throw away the old Democrats, and he's going to do it all. But beyond that political game, there is something very serious going on. Whenever capitalism has crashed, suffered not just another economic downturn, they have that in capitalism every 4 to 7 years, but a real big one where millions of people lose their jobs, not for 6 months, not for 18 months, but for years on end. Whenever that has happened, you begin to see anxiety. And you see two kinds of anxiety. One, we have to do something to save capitalism. It's in mortal danger. That's one reaction. That's where fascism lies. But there's also another reaction. There's the reaction of capitalism is irreparably broken and we need to go to a different, better system. So the solution isn't save capitalism, but go beyond it. Take society to a new and different system that doesn't crash like this capitalism just has. Sometimes both of these movements get lumped together under names like populism. That's the popular one this time. The idea being people are scared, people are worried, people are looking for new directions, people are angry about what's happening to the mass of people from this crumbling economic system. So you can lump them all together, but lumping them is itself a political act, an ideological act, because they are fundamentally different. Saving the system through a strong man who can carry us through is a very different political project from saying goodbye to capitalism and moving on to one or another alternative. So we have names over time. The name for the effort to hold on to capitalism, to keep it going in a new way with a strong man, that's called fascism. The effort to go beyond a broken capitalism usually goes by the name socialism or communism. And as I'll point out, these two alternative reactions to crashes of capitalism usually hate each other, struggle tremendously against each other, and have often been very, very unkind, as I will explain. So let's begin with the analysis. What is fascism? Fascism is basically the name for an economic system, even though the word has been used for many things. But in economics, fascism is when the government is called in. The government steps in to reinforce, to support, to sustain private capitalist enterprises. You see, those private capitalist enterprises left to themselves are falling apart. They can't sell their goods, they can't maintain their job roles, they lay people off, they cut back, they plunge people into a situation of no job, no income, no prospects. It's a mass suffering. And the capitalist system is called into question when people see it performing this badly. That's what happened in 1929 that led into the Great Depression of the 1930s. And that is what happened in 2008 that led to the last 10 years of economic crisis, of political upheaval, where the strong men could emerge and have an audience, etc. The fascist solution to capitalism's breakdown is to bring in the government to support private capitalist enterprises. It is sometimes referred to as a merging of the government and private enterprise. Not to go to another system, but to keep the existing system going. What does the government do in fascism? Well, it helps private capitalists by getting rid of the trade unions and replacing them with its own organizations, run by the government, controlled so that they support rather than challenge private capitalists. Here's a second one. The government comes in and does for private companies what they couldn't do for themselves. It rearranges foreign trade so that domestic capitalists have an easier time selling their goods abroad and blocking imports so they can sell to their own people because the government has prevented imports from coming in, say by, I don't know, tariffs would be one way to arrange this sort of thing. The government comes in and deregulates. That's a clever term to say that the regulations that are costly to capitalists are removed, and the regulations that help them are enhanced. That's typically what fascists do. And they typically like to boost the economy by an enormous expenditure on the military, putting people to work in the military and putting people to work producing the guns, the bullets, the planes, and the uniforms of those people in military as a tremendous way to stimulate and support and to profit private capitalist enterprises. Military and capitalists, government and capitalists merging together to run the system in a way that builds up capitalism, captures what has to be done that the capitalists couldn't do for themselves, and makes the system have some more life. It's all about saving capitalism. Now, the problem is, of course, that while they're doing that, the other side of the reaction to capitalism's crashes is not sitting by and having tea. The socialists point to the breakdown of capitalism and say, see, we told you so. Capitalism is a system that, among its other flaws, like making people very rich or poor and very little in the middle, has another flaw called instability. It crashes. It crashes all the time, and every now and then it crashes big time. And the socialists then surge because they have an explanation and they have a solution. The way we deal with a capitalism that crashes, that plunges millions into unemployment, that makes people have more and more needs, even though it cuts back the production that could meet those needs for no reason that anybody can understand other than to keep the private capitalists in control, which they want to stay in. So the socialists appeal to the mass of people, particularly those unemployed, those without income, those whose educations had to be interrupted, those who see no future, and says, it's overdue, we should get to a different economic system. They want the government to help that project. Don't save capitalism, that's fascism. Help the mass of people move beyond capitalism to a socialist system, where things are run not for capitalists, but for the mass of people, where things are run to enable people to control their lives rather than controlling them in the interests of a system that already shows it can't work without that kind of rigid control. Fascism means the control of a population to save capitalism. Socialism means go beyond it. And they have trouble, these two. So one of the things the fascists offer, the fascist political parties, the fascist leaders, what they offer to the big businesses that they're saving is to squash, to remove, to end the power of the socialists. And typically they have done that not only in legal ways, but in illegal ways. Let me just give you a few examples from history. The leading communist intellectual and political leader in Italy at the time of the rise of Mussolini's fascism was a man named Antonio Gramsci. In the 1920s, when fascism arose because capitalism, while not crashing quite, was having terrible troubles and messing up people's lives, he arrested Antonio Gramsci, put him in jail for the rest of Gramsci's life, and effectively killed him. The other major fascist leader in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler, will go down in history, as he already has, for having killed people on a scale we've really rarely seen in human history, and with a ferocity in which socialists, communists, as well as Jews and gypsies and others, were simply destroyed physically so that they would be removed, as were all the leaders of independent workers' organizations. Fascists kill socialists almost everywhere where you see fascism. And that's a service they provide to capitalists too, because it destroys the most active leading forces within the working class, saying that the solution to a broken capitalism is to go somewhere else. Well, we've come to the end of the first half of this program devoted to analyzing fascism. We will be right back in a few seconds, but before that, let me remind you, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's an enormous service to us and lets you know what we are doing. Please make use of our websites, rdwolf.com with two F's and democracyatwork.info. Using those websites gets you access to materials we post there, allows you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And as always, our thanks and appreciation go to those of you that make use of our Patreon activities and are part of our Patreon community, patreon.com/economic update. We thank you, and please stay with us. The discussion of fascism will continue. Welcome back, friends, to the second half of Economic Update and our discussion today of fascism, particularly the economic forms of fascism. Well, if you've understood what we said in the first half, then it follows that capitalists are in trouble and that they're going to need to change the way the world works for them to survive. The old way, which in our case right now was free trade, globalization, allowing money and people to move around the world to wherever the jobs and the profits are, the whole free trade world, won't work for capitalism anymore. They're not making the kind of money they wanted to. They're laying people off. They're going through a crisis like the crash, that happened in 2008. So fascism is the plan to get around all those problems by reorganizing and having the government come in, not the government staying out while private enterprises do their thing. That's what got us into the crash of 2008. No, now it's the government stepping in and making a capitalism work that can't work without the government. That's why in the last months of 2008, the same capitalist businessmen, big business tycoons who had denounced the government as unnecessary and wasteful and all of that, begged for the government to come in and save them. They all went on their private jets to Washington. Please help us, bail us out if we're a bank. Bail us out if we're General Motors and our whole car business is collapsing. Yeah, they wanted the government to come in quick. And it turns out a quick fix wasn't enough. They needed the government to be there a long time. That's what happens when capitalism crashes. And fascism steps in. But the problem with fascism has always been that for the government, which at least publicly is supposed to represent all the people, supposed to attend to the needs of all the people, is now busily being used by the biggest capitalists to save them, their profits, their social position sitting at the top of the economic pyramid that we call capitalism. So the government can't say, we're saving the people who run this show. We're saving the few who are capitalists. No, we're not going to waste a lot of time on the mass of the people, the majority. Now, they couldn't possibly say that because that's not tolerable. So there has to be another way that you can justify, another way to contextualize, another way to paint the movement of the government in to support private capitalism. It can't be admitted for what it is. What's the disguise? What's the way to get it done? And the answer is really simple. Nationalism. It's always been the go-to thing to say. The argument being the government is stepping in and taking over and getting rid of these people and changing everything and manipulating everything, not to help capitalists, heaven forbid, but to help the nation. The whole nation is at danger, and the government is going to step in and save the nation. Meanwhile, taking all the steps that fascism always involves. Getting rid of the labor unions, getting rid of the socialists and communists, getting rid of the regulations that impede profits, manipulating the foreign rest of the world to make things more profitable for your people here, to help capitalists who can't help themselves anymore. And nationalism is the disguise. Hitler wasn't helping big business. He even called his party the National Socialist Party, as if he could fool people into thinking that he had something to do with socialism. And he saved Germany from the evil Russians against whom he went to war, from the Jews, from the gypsies, from the homosexuals, from all the people he then savaged to give the Germans the idea, I'm saving Germany. Mussolini did the same thing in Italy. Bolsonaro is talking like that in Brazil. He's saving Brazil from the evil people who threaten the nation. And now let's use the best example, Mr. Trump. Do we have fascism in America? Not yet. No, we don't have it yet. But boy, have we got movement in that direction, and it would be naive and ignorant not to see it. Let's go. Mr. Trump attacked free trade. He attacks globalization. He attacks all the notions of the free market being the best way to organize an economy, something we've been told for the last 50 years. No, no, no. He is going to punish the Russians. He's going to punish the Chinese. He's going to punish the Europeans. He's going to control the trade by hitting them with taxes. The government's going to intervene massively in international trade. He's proud of it. And why? To save the nation. He's going to block the border on the southern part of the United States to save America's something from the hordes of caravans coming in and taking away our national identity. Get the picture? He's a strong man who's going to do it. He, in December of 2017, he gave big business the biggest tax cut it had ever seen. After 40 years in which they had become more wealthy, after 40 years in which the wages in America went absolutely nowhere, when business didn't need another boost, they were falling apart despite the benefits they've gotten, so he had to come in and give them another big boost. These are all signs of a nationalism that's disguising a service to capitalists who can't make it on their own, as evidenced by the crash of 2008 and the 10 years since then that have been a lost decade for most American working-class families. Wow. And yet there are still people, and this is the final point that we will have time for today. There are still people who make an equation between fascism and socialism, who like to think of them as somehow together having a big role for the government and that that's the issue. That's a remarkable act, given that Hitler attacked and destroyed the Soviet Union, given that every fascist has been the enemy of socialists and vice versa for as long as modern history has any records of these two social forces. Yes, they both want the government to step in, but that's where it ends. They want the government to step in for radically different reasons on a different project going to a different future. The fascists want the government to come in and reinforce, stabilize private capitalist profits. And the socialists want the government in to help transform society so it isn't capitalist anymore, so that the number one guide to what gets produced, what gets invested in, isn't profits for a few, but social benefits for the many. The socialists are the ones who make fun of the notion that if you do something for private profit, it'll trickle down and help everybody else. No, it doesn't, they point out, which is why the inequality that we have seen in the last 30 years only worsens the inequality that capitalism already had. And that's why the so-called solution to the instability of capitalism, its periodic downturns punctuated by the collapses and crashes that we've been talking about today, socialists argue that's not a system worth preserving. That's not a system that should be fixed up yet again. It is a refrigerator that has broken down so many times that the only logical and sensible response is to get a new one, to go to a different one, not to keep fixing something that works as badly as this one has now done, and repeatedly. Well then, what can we say about this? Well, the first and most important lesson is fascism is the effort by the richest people in the society, sitting on top of the biggest corporations, to save the system that made them rich after it has gone through a crash, like 1929, like 2008. That's what it's about. Save the system. Get rid of the critics of the system, the left, the socialists, the communists, the critics. Shut them up. Put them in jail. Kill them. Get rid of them. And then deregulate, support, subsidize. Use the power of the government to support a broken economic system. And do it all in the name of the nation, of the identity of the nation. Find people to demonize who threaten the nation and then act out a drama of squelching them. In Germany, it was leftists and Jews. In Italy, it was Southerners versus Northerners and Gypsies and Jews. In other countries, you invent a good old days mythology, a story of the past when the nation was wonderful and great and super, and we're going to go back there. Make, put in the country, great again. That's a standard play. Hitler called what he was doing the Third Reich because it had a Reich that was the second and a Reich that was the first. That was the good old days of the past of Germany, and he was going to bring it back. Make Germany great again, literally, his slogan. And use whatever supports a nationalism can. If you can identify the nation with religion, go for that. Use religion as a way. We're protecting our religion is we're protecting our nationalism. And we're going to have a powerful government that does that so you can disguise and cover the support for a broken economic system against its critics. And build up the military. Why? Because that too is protecting the nation against foreign endangerment of whatever kind you can conjure up. The nationalist hysteria is a mechanism fascism has always used to support its prime function, which is to rescue, reinforce, and stabilize the instability and the social problems of a capitalist system. Socialism is a very different project. This is not to say that socialists haven't done terrible things. They have. It is not to deny that violence is not a special political tool of the right. It has also been used by the left. It is a serious problem, social violence. But to use it as if it were something peculiar to one or the other side misses the real point. It misses what is different about them. In whose interests, toward what ends are the means used? Means that you approve of, means that you don't. Criticize those that you don't, but don't lose sight of what fundamental difference divides the one from the other. We don't have fascism in the United States. Not yet. And maybe it won't come if enough Americans understand what's at stake and what's going on so that they can prevent it. There were efforts in the 1930s to move the United States in a fascist direction. Some of you who've done your history studies will remember Father Coughlin. You'll remember Huey Long, a very important leader in Louisiana. There were people who wanted to go in that direction, but there were people who didn't. And that fight saw the defeat of fascism here, even though that fight saw the victory of fascism in Germany. That's why it's important. It's understandable that fascism is in the news, and we need to understand it in order to avoid it. We've come to the end of this economic update. I hope you agree with me that this is an important topic for Americans to understand and to come to terms with. And that is why we devoted an entire program of economic update to this topic, as we will occasionally to other important topics like this, one of which will be the notion of a universal basic income. Thank you very much, and I look forward to talking with you again next week.